Estou passando nesse podcast para dividir uma informação que fez toda a diferença na minha vida. Quer fazer pós-graduação, mas tá impossível correr de um lugar para o outro?
Pois é, ainda mais com o trânsito.
Então você precisa conhecer a educação à distância do Senac. Sabia que é nota máxima no MEC? E tem diversos cursos de pós-graduação para te levar ainda mais longe. 100% online, sem necessidade de TCC e com acesso direto a todos os professores.
Ah, saber isso fez diferença sim.
Inscreva-se já na pós-graduação EAD. Quer saber? Senac EAD.
It's the Larry Kudlow Show. Free market prosperity starts here. Now, here's Larry Kudlow.
Inflation is here to stay. There's no way Kamala Harris is going to get around that. The ghost of inflation will hurt Kamala Harris through the election. That's the latest report by John Carney, economics editor for Breitbart News and co-author of the must-read Breitbart Business Digest. Welcome back, John. This is a very interesting piece. We've been above 2.4% inflation for 40 consecutive months. The last streak of inflation staying that high for that long ended in 1991 and was killed off by a recession. That's an interesting point, by the way. You've had, even though the yearly rate has come down, first of all, inflation has a long tail still affecting people with the 20% cumulative rise. But you're right. Inflation's not gone away. It's a hard thing to get rid of. And Kamala Harris was very much a part of the Bidenflation, wasn't she?
That's right. So one of the things when a lot of people are like, well, why are people still so upset about inflation? We've had high inflation. Inflation got higher during right around the financial crisis. We had a little spurt of inflation. But really, we haven't had a burst of inflation that lasted this long for really a generation. So people are feeling a kind of inflation that many people never felt in their entire lives. Other people haven't felt for 30 years. And it's really actually having a big psychological impact. It hasn't gone away. And as you said, Kamala was right there in the center of it. At the heart of what made inflation get so bad and stay so bad were the Biden spending programs, all of which passed only because Kamala Harris's tie-breaking vote on the ironically named Inflation Reduction Act, on the ironically named American Rescue Plan. It should be called the American Ruin Plan because that's what it did to our economy. She cast the tie-breaking vote. It wouldn't have happened. By the way, she didn't have to cast that tie-breaking vote. As vice president, usually the vice president does what the president says, but there's no constitutional mandate for her to vote for Biden's legislation. She did it on her own to pass that legislation. We would not have had as bad inflation as we had without her votes.
And she was proud of it. And you know what? I mean, almost lost in the headline of this price control plans that she unleashed yesterday is the $2 trillion price tag on the rest of her speech. That's what you're looking at. Now, the American Rescue Plan was $1.9 trillion, and that launched the inflation that got to 9%. And I might add, 2 quarters of negative GDP. The Inflation Reduction Act, misnamed, was a little over $1 trillion. What she said yesterday, John Carney, it was priced out by whatever they're called, the Federal Budget Watchdog Group, right. Maya McGinnis's group. They're saying it's going to be up to $2 trillion. Actually, what she produced yesterday is a bigger spending plan than the first two that you mentioned that caused the inflation in the first place.
That's right. There's a lot of inflationary stuff, actually, just in what she's proposed. First of all, this $25,000 for new home buyers will only push up the cost of new homes by exactly $25,000 because when you give people more money to spend only on a particular item, it makes that item go up in that price. Also, if her legislation for price controls actually, ironically, may make things go higher, because one of the things that some of the Democratic legislation that is trying to impose this, Elizabeth Warren had a version of this in the past, did was say you're not allowed to give a discount if you're a big food distributor to somebody like Costco. So that's one of the reasons food is cheaper at some of these giant places, Walmart, Costco, because they're buying in bulk, they can buy cheaper than some small places. If you outlaw that, that means people will shop Finley grills.
Coming
so
back.
It's actually inflationary.
John, let's look at the economy for a second. The retail sales report early last week was pretty strong. But I want to note that the industrial production report was negative again, and that the new housing starts report was very negative. And I know everybody focuses on consumer spending, but actually the production business side of the economy looks very poor, and housing's been in a recession for quite a while. So how do you read all that?
We could throw in there the Empire State Manufacturing Survey from the New York Fed and the Philly Fed's Manufacturing Survey, also both negative, both saying that contraction regionally that manufacturing is in contraction regionally. So yes, the industrial production number was very bad. Manufacturing is still struggling in the United States, we are really having a sort of two-sided economy. If there was any weakness in the consumer, that's it. We're in a recession. The consumer really is propping up the economy. That consumer number was very strong. I think if I were the Fed, I would be a little worried about that consumer number, because if people are still spending, then that was a little inflated. There was a burst in car buying because we had that program of cyber attack where you really couldn't buy cars for a little while in June. And so a lot of that got pushed into July. But still, it was, even if you take that a pretty good number, I think the Fed, I think that the idea that the Fed's going to cut 50 basis points. Oh, yeah, I think that should have erased 50 basis point cuts.
Why is it, though? I mean, I'll be devil's advocate. Why, if the demand side of the economy, a.k.a. consumer spending, is rising much faster than the supply side of the economy, which is the production numbers, and including the housing construction starts and so forth, and, you're still running, the CPI and the PCE deflator are still above the Fed's targets. Why are they in a rush to lower the rate at all? That's all I know Wall Street is kind of talking the Fed into it. Jay Powell will speak next week. I don't know, when does he speak? Friday or Thursday in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. But why? What's the real logic here?
There really shouldn't be any rush to cut rates at all. I understand they want to cut. Maybe they do one in September. They should definitely not do one in September, another in November, and then another in December. If they want to cut, they should cut and then pause. Let's see what happens to inflation if the Fed starts loosening. Don't just, march on, because as you said, the demand side is still really strong. We shouldn't be, slashing interest rates in the face of that.
Well, that's just something of a mystery to me. Their target is 2. They haven't hit the target yet, as you point out. So if you haven't hit the target, why do you want to lower the rate? I mean,
and history is very scary about this, Larry, because there's a lot of history that shows that inflation, even just last year, inflation came down. It was actually lower than it is right now, and then it went back up. That happens a lot in history where you kind of get head fakes. You think, oh, good, inflation's coming down, and then it roars right back up. They should be very nervous about that happening. If it does, that's a real recipe for inflation to get out of control. If the Fed is cutting and then interest rate and then inflation starts rising again, that'll be a serious problem.
I mean, I don't know, and I have not spoken to him directly about this, but I think Mr. Trump may well say to them, you're goosing the election year economy to help the Democrats because you have a major target. And the economy, it still has some juice on the consumer side. I mean, I think he's going to take a whack at the Fed. He may take a couple of whacks. Lord knows he's done it in the past.
And I guarantee you the Democrats, Kamala Harris, will declare victory. Once the Fed starts cutting, you will hear all of Kamala Harris's proxies say, this is the Fed telling us the inflation crisis is over. You can now vote for Kamala Harris without worrying about inflation. And so Trump will actually, absolutely be right to say that this is giving Harris a boost in her election chances. There's no reason to cut before the election. They should have made it clear, and Jay Powell still could rescue this by making it clear next week at Jackson Hole, we're not cutting in September, we're going to wait till November. Unfortunately, they should have done that weeks ago. The market now is so convinced that that they're going to cut in September that if they don't, and if they signal they won't, you're going to see a big problem. The stocks will crash.
Well, you'll get another 1,000-point drop. But, I just think it would show some backbone by Jay Powell. Yes. I really do. I saw, what's her name, Bowman. She was the small business person that Trump appointed to the Fed. She said she's the first one to come out and say, don't necessarily think we have to cut rates. And I just think that's interesting. I'd like to see Christopher Waller say the same thing. Cooler heads should prevail right now because nothing is very clear. Inflation's not licked. And, Kamala comes in, spends another $2 trillion in deficit financing with her goofy price gauging stuff. Couldn't read the teleprompter. But anyway, I think this is not good. I think it's the wrong direction.
And look, they don't know the composition of Congress. They don't know who will be in the White House. They could just wait till after the election, figure it out, and then have a better chance of which direction fiscal policy is going, which direction regulation, which direction energy, and then cut with that knowledge or not cut with that knowledge rather than cut in advance of it and then be surprised by what's going to happen after Election Day. I
think you're right. I think that would be the smartest thing to do. You go to Jackson Hole? I don't go to Jackson Hole anymore. I used to go all the time. I spoke there once or twice, but that was when there were Republicans out there. There aren't any Republicans at Jackson Hole anymore. It's all a bunch of left-wingers.
I've only been there when the Fed isn't anywhere near there. The only hike I've ever been in Jackson Hole for is out in the mountains.
Yeah, I know. That's great stuff. So Powell's speech, everybody's going to be speculating this week about Powell's speech. Are there any big econ numbers out this coming week?
So not really. This is going to be a relatively quiet week. People will be very focused on Powell's speech, and then following that, the next jobs number. Because if that jobs number comes in, if the August jobs number comes in hot in September, then I think the Fed will really have to reconsider this plan to cut. And Powell make that very clear, by the way. He can say, look, if the jobs number comes in weak again, maybe we'll cut. But if we're getting hot numbers, do not be as convinced as you are that we are going to cut. He should at least warn the market that, there's no guarantee of a cut, which is what Michelle Baumann was saying. Other Fed people have said they don't think we need to cut till the fourth quarter, which would not be, which would be in the November or December meeting. They shouldn't be allowing the market to get this far ahead of where the Fed has said it is.
And John Carney, last one, so early September, there's a jobs report, and then there'll be one in early October.
That's right.
Right? So there's 2 more jobs reports left. And how many inflation reports? 1?
Yeah, well, we've got one more
CPI.
We have we'll also have another PCE report coming in. I think that actually comes in next week. So we'll get some more information, but the CPI probably isn't going to be anything frightening. I think at this point the jobs number will matter a lot. That they're going to have to pay a lot of attention to that. And frankly, these retail sales numbers they should be watching, because if people still are spending as freely as the retail sales numbers imply, then again, who are you cutting for?
Right.
The American people have the money they need to buy the things they need. Why are you cutting now? It looks to me very political.
All right. John Carney, terrific stuff. Economics editor, Breitbart News, and co-author of the Breitbart Business Digest. Thank you, John. Folks, quick break. The other side, Professor Mike Faulkner is going to tell us some more about economic policy and Kamalanomics. I'm Kudlow. We'll be right back.
This is the Larry Kudlow Show.